Hey, what's up, everybody? We have a new YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe right now. Leave a comment on the video. Share it with your friends. It's also a podcast, 3 and Out, wherever you listen with me, John Middlekauff, Apple, Spotify. We have you covered, as well as thevolume.com. We have merch. Check out. I got 3 and Out hats right now. Thevolume.com. Search the podcast. Buy some merch. Well, we got a lot going on right now. The legal tampering period in the NFL might as well just be called normal free agency because everybody is getting signed left and right. Wild morning here on Monday, the 11th. Guys flying off the shelves. Obviously, a lot of guys that were franchised have been signed or extended. Yesterday, I did a couple videos in regards to Russell Wilson joining the Pittsburgh Steelers, Kenny Pickett heading to the bench, Eric Armstead, who is going to be released by the 49ers. But today, we got to dive in. I might do several today because so much is happening. But clearly, some of the big names in free agency, we have finality to where they're headed. Some we knew, right? Cousins was pretty obvious he was going to Atlanta. He's there. We will discuss that. Just saw some of the money. It's essentially like a 3-year, $100 million deal, but he's getting like $50 million signing bonus. We will discuss that one. Howie Roseman, I talked to him at the Combine. I said, I know you got things up your sleeve. He always downplays it. He's a professional. And then what did he do? Signs a legit pass rusher from the Jets, Bryce Huff. Saquon Barkley goes from the Giants to the Birds. And who would have thought? So we will dive into the Eagles, getting aggressive as they always do. And I'm sure they're going to trade some of the guys that they have on their defensive line, whether it's Sweat or Hassan Reddick, which have been rumored to be on the move. But as of right now, they're not. But that's why we're going to keep the content flowing. And then just some other reactions to Christian Wilkins signs with the Raiders. Josh Jacobs signs with the Green Bay Packers. Love that. And the Rams sign a really, really good offensive guard in Jonah Jackson. So we'll kind of dive into it all. But man, what a freaking morning for the National Football League. What a time to talk about, follow, and be a fan of this league. Money is a-flowing. But before we dive into my thoughts on everything that's happening, I got to tell you about my friends, my partners, and the official ticketing app of this podcast. They happen to be called Game Time. What I need you to do is grab your smartphone, grab your iPad, download the Game Time app. Are you an NFL fan? Do you want to go to an NFL game this fall? Obviously, it's a long time away. But if you want to go to NCAA, March Madness, right around the corner, NBA playoff games, baseball. I just went to a Dodger game yesterday. If you have the chance to go to a Dodger game this year, no matter where you live, if they're coming to town, I would recommend it. Just an incredible group of talent. It is. They are stocked with dudes. So download the Game Time app, buy a pair of tickets, and when you do, promo code John. John, John. Promo code John. Save $20 at checkout. Game Time, promo code John. The Atlanta Falcons. I think today is a reflection of a couple things. When desperation meets an older owner that's over 80 who has an unlimited amount of cash. They have drafted skilled guys for the last several years. And is Kyle Pitts any good? I don't know. Drake London is, and obviously Bijan is very, very talented. And defensively, they looked pretty solid last year. But going into the season with Desmond Ridder as your starting quarterback was a joke when they decided to do it, and it aged worse as the season went on. Now, Kirk Cousins, before he got injured, was playing the best football of his life. You could argue the game he played against the Niners, I think it was the week before he tore his Achilles, especially given that it was a primetime game, is the best game he's ever played. I know he won a playoff game on the road, and he made a great throw. I forget which wide receiver he hit to kind of seal the deal in that game for the Vikings, but he had become a really good player. he was no longer like this overrated, overpaid guy. He was a very, very solid starter. He was somewhere, I would say, 8 to 11 as a starting quarterback in the NFL. Really, his one downfall is he wasn't a very good athlete. So if you could pressure him, he was a dead man walking, a lot like Jared Goff. But if you protected him, he became clearly one of the better pocket quarterbacks in the NFL. I do think, and this is going to be on the forefront of the discussion with him and Aaron Rodgers, if both those guys come back and don't show ill effects of the Achilles injury, which historically has been one of the worst injuries in football, I do think it'll change the narrative a little bit, at least with certain positions, that injury won't be viewed as catastrophic as it has typically been viewed throughout the history of sports. Now, when you sign a guy and you give him a ton of money and he's coming off a major injury, I'm sorry, there is a ton of risk. I've said forever, I completely understand this. He was by far the best quarterback on the market, not even debatable. And he is clearly the guy that they not only circled, wanted, and went all in for. And we knew last year when the Minnesota Vikings were kind of over Cousins. Hell, they had discussions. The Niners balked and didn't want him, but they were open to trading him last year. This was over. Whether he had gotten injured or had not, he was that last year was going to be his final season for the Minnesota Vikings. And obviously that played out that way. And now the Atlanta Falcons, all their chips are in the middle of the table on this guy, a 36-year-old coming off a torn Achilles. But luckily, and this is why I've defended, like, at least I understand being aggressive for him, is he's never been predicated on moving around. It's why I think Aaron Rodgers, even if he's still a solid player, will be a shell of himself because most of his ability was scrambling around, and he's like the greatest on-the-move thrower we've ever seen. And that ability, if that's taken away even just 30, 40% of what he once was, he's nowhere near the same guy. Cousins stays in like a 3 or 4 yard radius. He does not move at all. So if you get a guy who is, I would say, 85% of the guy we've seen the last couple of years, that is such a major upgrade for this franchise. Now, they still have major question marks, right? Everyone loves Raheem Morris. He's changed the narrative of his career from not that long ago. I mean, it was now, 2011, when he was named a young head coach for Tampa Bay. He was like going out with players. And over the next decade became one of the highly respected guys in the league, has coached offense, coached defense. McVay, Shanahan loves him. And now he gets a chance to run this franchise, right? And he brings Zach Robinson. They're going to run the McVay-Shanahan offense, which is very quarterback-friendly, something Cousins has done. And he gets a lot of weapons. But, like, I'm sorry, I've been following this league and now working around this sport for a long time. Like, we'll see. Like, I think it should work. But if there are some ill effects, now I've watched him on Instagram chasing his kids. He looks pretty healthy. I talked with his agent at the combine, said his rehabilitation is going fantastic. When you pay a guy this much money and give him this much guaranteed, he has to be the guy that we've seen lately. He just does. Now, their division sucks, right? The Carolina Panthers are easily the worst team in football. Still, I have no faith that they're going to be any good. Derek Carr and Dennis Allen, who, while they have some talent on the team, we learned last year you cannot pick them in meaningful games. You just cannot. Now, Tampa, they're a real team. And when I say real team, like 9, 10, 11 wins, like kind of that range. Todd Bowles, solid head coach, definitely a really good defensive mind. They did lose an offensive coordinator, but they're bringing most of their guys back. Baker's coming back. Mike Evans is coming back. They franchise Winfield. They already had some, Wirfs. They have Vita Vea. Like, they got some good players on the squad. So, to me, right now, the Atlanta Falcons, as my producer James just texted me, is the current betting favorite for that division. I would still, like, if I was betting on them today, I would still pick Tampa, but Atlanta is a real contender. And, like, I'm sorry, I'm not taking the Saints seriously. I'll have to be proven wrong. I picked them last year and was embarrassed halfway through the season. I'm like, I can't believe this. And like I said, Carolina, I don't view it the same. And I do wonder if it's easier to kind of overextend yourself for an older quarterback who's coming off a major injury when you're really desperate and your division has a lot of question marks. Would you do this in a better division? Probably not. Me and Colin talked about this last night. It's easier for Tampa to pay Baker, even though a lot of these contracts and a lot of this right now is, I'm not breaking down the money. There's too much moving around. I can't keep up with it. I'm just talking about the player. Though the money is a big part of what we do here on this show. I will get to it as the week goes on and we get all the details. But like, I get it. Like, I understand re-signing Baker Mayfield and in this division. It would not be the same if you had to play Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes twice a year, or Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson twice a year. But in this division, both these signings, I completely understand. Now, do I view either of those teams as like Super Bowl contenders or even teams that I could see in the NFC Championship game? I do not. But let's face it, if you make the playoffs, and Atlanta has not sniffed the playoffs for a while now, and they've been really, really desperate, right? Look at Tampa. They actually weren't that desperate. They had Tom Brady for 3 years and made the playoffs all 3 years, won a Super Bowl, hosted playoff games. So when they got Baker and then he proved themselves right, they kind of know what it looks like. They're like, yeah, Atlanta hasn't had a good quarterback for like 6 or 7 years back. I mean, remember, they had a couple years of Matt Ryan when he stunk. So he hasn't been good since Steve Sarkisian was the offensive coordinator. So that just creates desperation. In Minnesota, I think sometimes they're very analytically driven. Their general manager is like a former Wall Street guy. You think, and I'm all for, viewing a lot of the majority of players on your roster, you should view as replaceable. It is difficult with quarterback, and you can patchwork it. You can kind of draft guys. The chances that they replace Kirk Cousins, to me, is slim to none. I have a hard time seeing it. Already rumors flying around about Sam Darnold going there. There's been some rumors about them maybe trading for Trey Lance. Whatever, if any of those names surface as their replacement, I think we all have to acknowledge that is a dramatic downgrade. Obviously, I mean, Trey Lance is not even a starter. Sam Darnold, who I like as a backup, replacing Cousins, and I know they got some firepower, right? They have, you could argue, the best wide receiver in the league in Jefferson. Jordan Addison looks to be a really good player. Their head coach looks to be a pretty dynamic play caller, but I don't know. I think, and listen, sometimes teams want to reset. Not often, though, in the NFL. This is not the NBA, when teams are cool with tanking, because it's so easy to be competitive if you just get it right at a couple of positions. It's hard to suck like Carolina. You have to be very, very poorly run to just have no shot on a weekly basis. But it was pointing this way since the combine, and it played out that way. Kirk Cousins, now the starting quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons. And when it's all said and done, when this dude retires, he is going to be, I mean, probably a top 5 guy. Now that it's going to change over time, right? The Josh Allens, the Herberts, the Lamar Jacksons, obviously Mahomes, in 10, 20 years as the cap continues to go up. But this guy's going to have made more money than the overwhelming majority of quarterbacks that have played the last 20 years. And these are guys like Aaron Rodgers, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Ben Roethlisberger. So Cousins has just figured out a way to turn his career with, I'm pretty sure, one playoff win into an absolute ATM machine. So props to his agent, props to Cousins. And the Atlanta Falcons definitely, like, to me, they weren't interesting last year. They were a tough watch. I get paid to do this, and it's like, I'm not watching Desmond Ridder. Why? Because I know you don't matter. And now they do matter. They're a team that you have to pay attention to, especially early. And I think they're going to be one of the more fascinating teams in the league by just making this move, just in terms of, like, what does it look like? The thrill and excitement of March Mania is here. And DraftKings Sportsbook, one of America's top-rated sportsbook apps, is giving new customers a shot to turn $5 into $150 instantly in bonus bets with any college basketball bet. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code JOHN, J-O-H-N. New customers can bet $5 to get $150 instantly in bonus bets only at DraftKings Sportsbook with code JOHN. The crown is yours. The Philadelphia Eagles. I asked Howie at the Combine. I said, what do you got up your sleeve? We all know you're going to wheel and deal. And what did he do today? He took the Giants, who 2 years ago when they went 9-7 and their coach won, coach of the year, and people like me were going, this guy's like the shorter, chubbier version of Bill Parcells. He looks like a rocket ship. To now that franchise, I view dramatically different 2 years later. They just lost their best player over that 2-year run. Texted with a couple pro scouts, and Giants fans know this. He kind of carried you guys 2 years ago. And even last year, with just a disaster situation at quarterback, O-line very average, he was easily one of your better players. And for a guy that has battled some injuries, he's played in 30 games the last 2 years. Now, I'm a little surprised at this move, right? Because historically, Howie, they've paid certain positions. They just extend Landon Dickerson. They always pay their offensive linemen. They signed Bryce Huff, the pass rusher from the New York Jets, who had a big season, who's only 25 years old, who is now officially the highest paid undrafted free agent non-quarterback in league history. And I texted with a couple of people. I'm like, how did this guy not get drafted? He said, well, it's part of the COVID season, didn't have a pro day, didn't have numbers. If it would have been a normal year, zero chance he doesn't get picked. But he was, he's one of those players, collateral damage. Some guys benefited from it in the opposite way. Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Mac Jones, those guys stole off a rookie quarterback or contract. And now all those guys are backup/third stringers. And then you get some of the guys later in the draft who were like, how did this guy fall through the cracks? Well, typically when you don't have a pro day, you barely have a season, it was all off. And then you get a guy like this who is just a havoc creator off the edge and just can make some shit happen, gets a huge contract as an undrafted free agent. And now we'll have to see if Howie trades one of his starting defensive ends in either Sweat or Hassan Reddick, which a lot of people envision them doing. But paying a running back is not something that like number-driven guys typically do. I actually think there are a couple elements to this. One, the running back position for Jalen is kind of important because clearly they're a little uncomfortable, which I think is crazy because one of his best attributes is running. But Colin and I talked about this last night too. Last couple of years, he's been beat up, right? 2 years ago, he missed some games and ultimately it probably cost him the MVP. Last season, as the year went on, clearly he just didn't look like the same guy. So they are hesitant, and clearly he is hesitant to just run like he did his first couple years, which, again, I think he's fucking fantastic at it. But unlike Lamar Jackson, he's not super explosive, right? So he ends up in just a lot of compromise situation. Lamar is so fast that he can get out of bounds or he can get down before he gets touched. Jalen does end up in tackles. And there's a reason running backs get beat up. They get tackled every time they carry the ball. So Jalen, I think they clearly want to roll back any focus on him running the ball. So they get a guy who you pay him, like they view him like a bell cow. He is a difference-making player with the ball in his hands. Now, I think a lot of organizations would just be very anti-paying a guy, but even his $26 million guaranteed, he's making less per year than guys like Christian McCaffrey and Alvin Kamara. So this is the one position where all these numbers keep going up. Their numbers go the opposite ways. So I think they'd go with the cap going up. We get a playmaker at a relatively cheap deal based on his position and based on some of the other guys at his position. And we immediately help out the quarterback. We get a guy who you can give the ball to, 15, 20 times a game if we want to. Now, the question is, the Eagles under Sirianni and just historically, they like to pass the ball. Last year, there were times, I think Saquon's a better player than DeAndre Swift, though DeAndre Swift is a really good player. He signed with the Bears. There were games like hand the fucking ball off. You have one of the best offensive lines in the league. Give him the rock. So Will Kellen Moore, who when he was under McCarthy was getting bad. He gets pass happy. So they have this asset now who is talented and they're paying a lot of money. Will they consistently hand him the ball? To me, that's a big question mark that can't get answered till the season. And it's always easy to be like, we want to value the run game. We want to focus on the run game. We have a fantastic offensive line. Well, you got to do it. And I think they're going to try to do it because they're going to save their quarterback. The other thing is this. You lose Jason Kelce last week, who was clearly the team captain, leader of the squad. Fletcher Cox, who I put kind of right behind him as one of the voices, leaders of the squad. That's a lot to lose. That's 25 plus years and 13, 14 Pro Bowls worth of leadership. And Saquon Barkley, high character, super focused cat, I think they paid a premium for character because they go, we're missing some of that. And let's face it, Jalen's a really serious dude. I'm not sure he's the most verbal guy, definitely on game days. And Saquon has always carried himself like that. So maybe they view they're getting a guy. No, I know they view they're getting a guy who super high character, team leader, bright lights guy, been playing in New York forever, was a star player at Penn State. I understand the move. I'm not super into paying running backs huge amounts of guaranteed money, but I get it. And on the flip side, I think the Giants are going to be fucking terrible. I mean, they were awful last year. They're losing one of their best players that they have heavily relied on. I think this Brian Daboll situation, all these coaches coaching moving, the situation internally with the staff is a pretty big question mark. Listen, things can change, but their quarterback situation kind of is what it is. I view the Giants as easily the worst team in that division and the worst team moving forward. And let's face it, they kind of have been, even with the disaster that the Redskins have been throughout the last 20 years. The Giants have been pretty poorly run beside 2 years ago when they won 9 games and everyone threw them a celebration for like 6-7 years. Now you lose a player. And listen, you could say, well, you got to let running backs walk. Okay, and I understand that, but he's a huge part of their ability to compete. So I don't know, man. I don't think even the Eagles view it quite like we're stealing a dude from the Giants, but it is kind of a death blow to their operation. eBay Motors is here for the ride. You know, the first car I ever got, I was 16 years old, and my grandpa gave me a ride. And like any young lad who got a car that, let's face it, would not have been my first choice, I had to touch it up a little bit. And we tinted out the windows. We added a big subwoofer to the back. And you could hear me from miles away coming home. My parents sure loved me for that one. So did my neighbors. But I think the key to any young person getting a car is to personalize a little bit. Because you're probably not going to get your dream car. And as you get older, you kind of become a car person or you don't. But you definitely have preferences, right? Some of us like bigger cars. I know I do. I've only had big cars, SUVs. And there are certain non-negotiables. I like 3 rows of seats. Now, ideally, I don't have kids right now, so I take out that 3rd row of seat, and I like a big, I like a lot of trunk room. Some people, don't like SUVs, like smaller cars. I've never been that big since my high school car of tinting the windows. I don't care if you see me or not. But I know some people, like, the first thing they do is tint the windows. It's crazy. The older you get, I had to have the subwoofers. The subwoofer, I couldn't listen to music for 5 minutes with the subwoofer like I did when I was younger. But there is something very, very special about that first car. I don't care how many cars you get since, how much money you make to get sweeter cars. You never quite forget that first ride and some of the memorable moments that you had in it in your high school years. So with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. The Raiders. Christian Wilkins is a good example You live in Miami and you make a lot of money and you get that no state income tax. You ain't about to go to some high tax rate state. And he goes to Vegas, which paid him a ton of money, and you get paired with Max Crosby. To me, it makes a lot of sense with their new head coach who won a Super Bowl on that '07 Giants team that took down the undefeated Patriots. Well, how'd they win that Super Bowl? They had an elite defensive line. And if you have an elite defensive line, it can mask some of your other problems. So now they get Max Crosby, who is, I don't know, a top 5 defensive lineman in the league. You pair him with Christian Wilkins. I also think you hope that those two guys rub off on Tyrese Wilson, a dude you drafted last year, 7th or 8th from Texas Tech, who had an awful rookie season. And if you could just get that guy going a little bit, all of a sudden, you got a little something with your defensive line. And they got a lot of question marks. They do not have a quarterback. But I am always a believer in investing in the line of scrimmage, offensive and defensive lines. So you pair easily the best guy that actually hit the free agent market, in my opinion, in Wilkins, who's been an excellent player since his days in college playing for Clemson. They're in really good. That's a really good signing. Now you got to pay for it. And they gave him 85 plus guaranteed, less than Chris Jones got, 95 million. But this dude's good. This dude's really good. And I also think it's a reflection, a little bit like the Giants. If you're the Miami Dolphins, you cannot lose a homegrown player at a premium position. It just cannot happen. That shows me you're poor at running your books. Something is off. You can manipulate the cap. You can figure out ways. For you just to let this guy walk, to me, that's baffling. Now, sometimes there are internal circumstances, maybe the character, or maybe a guy's been in trouble. To my knowledge, that is not the case with this guy. He, like I said a couple days ago, if you look at, you did a draft on their team. If they were just an expansion team and everyone got to pluck a player off their team, and it went 1 through 31, Tyreek would be the number 1 pick that every team in the league, if you had the number 1 pick, the guy you would take from that team. I think Wilkins would have been number 2. So the Dolphins just lost arguably their second best player who they drafted to free agency. That's a fucking embarrassment. Look around the league. How many guys that were really good players that, what did teams do? Jalen Johnson, I'm going to franchise you. We're going to work out a deal. I always screw up the dude's name, but the defensive lineman with the Baltimore Ravens. Franchise you. Work out a deal. That's usually the way it works. Even the Chiefs, like, we're going to make sure we get a deal with Chris Jones. Why? He's really freaking good. And we don't want to lose a guy who's a premium player at a position that most teams do not have high-end guards and centers. It's why we have never seen so much talent at defensive tackle. And Wilkins is one of those guys. So to let him just walk, you're like, well, they'll get a comp third in a year. Great. You would never trade pick 100 for this guy straight up. So that is a loss. That's a major loss. And it's why when everyone was having these takes, when the Bills cut everybody, like, is their window closed? Well, they're going to win the division. How would you not pick the Buffalo Bills to win the AFC East this year? The Patriots suck. The Jets have way more question marks than answers. And let's face it, the Dolphins just aren't that well run. And their quarterback, as the games get a little tougher, doesn't look that good. And I'm not trying to shit on Tua. He's fine. But it's not like no one views him as a top 10 quarterback. I don't care what the stats say. Show me a big game against a good team. You're going to bet against them. I did. So did you. Anyone with a brain did. And you made money. So this not a great day for the Dolphins. That's for sure. A nice little addition for the Raiders. Now, on the flip side, and I haven't seen the contracts yet, Josh Jacobs, to me, is a better player than Saquon Barkley. I think Josh Jacobs was the best running back on the market. Now, he's had some injuries. He's had some durability concerns. But to me, he's a complete player. He can catch the ball. He can run it inside and outside. He can break tackles. He can make you miss. I wouldn't call him like Adrian Peterson top end speed, but his play speed is excellent. He can block. He's just really good. And the Green Bay Packers signing him, their offense could be elite. I mean, Aaron Jones is, I don't know, a top 5 running back in the NFL. You could argue Jacobs is as well. So you get a 1-2 combination. Their speed at wide receiver, all the young guys, is just incredible. We saw it the second half of the season on display. Now, listen, being a good player in the NFL, just like being any good player in baseball, basketball, any team sport, any sport, tennis, golf, is not just about having a good 3-month stretch. It's about doing it year in, year out, right? Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar, these guys have been doing it for 5, 6, 7 years. So Aaron Donald, Trent Williams, Lane Johnson, being a high-end player, Travis Kelce, every single year, it's hard. It's why even at the highest level of competition, there is a gap between the All-Pro, Pro Bowl guys, and even the next group. But if Jordan Love just continues to play like the guy we saw the second half of the season, the Packers could be a fucking power. They could be definitely a top 2 or 3 offense in the NFL. And the question mark has been the same thing it's been for 15 plus years since McCarthy and Rodgers got it rolling. Can they figure it out on defense? If they ever, they do not need to be the 2000 Ravens. They do not need to be the 2023 Ravens or the 85 Bears. They don't even need to have a top 5 defense. But if they can just be a good defense, this team is a Super Bowl contender. Hell, they almost beat the Niners to go to the NFC Championship last year with the youngest roster in the league, a bunch of 22, 23-year-olds on offense, as well as a quarterback who has never made a start or had made one start in his career leading into 2023. So if you tell me that Jordan Love is good again, and the defense is a question mark. I like Jeff Hafley, everything I've heard about him from people in the league. They clearly have physically gifted guys on defense. Now, actually executing and playing well is another story. But if you just tell me they're a solid defense next year, this is a team that can win 12, 13 games and be in the mix to win the Lombardi Trophy. I don't even think that's debatable. Now, if Jordan Love either regresses or struggles, then yeah, I mean, just like any team in the league, quarterback doesn't play well. But the guy that we saw down the stretch, which had glimpses of looking like a young Aaron Rodgers, which typically, if you would have told me I would have been saying that at this time last year, I would have been like, you're nuts. But we watched him. He did it. We saw him do it over and over in the middle of November through the end of December. So, and then what he did against the Cowboys in the playoff game. This guy now has 2 playoff games worth of experience. Sometimes you bet on a guy, it's like, well, his team went 8-9. We'll see what happens when the light. No, this guy was playing in massive games. I mean, they had to win down the stretch. Right? That even the last game of the season where they had to beat the Bears to get into the playoffs, then going on the road and beating the Cowboys. This guy is legitimate, some pelts on the wall for a first-year starter. So I'm buying the Packers, man. That's just a solid move. The other thing, LaFleur is actually ultimately McVay, it turns out, has a little more Andy Reid to him than Kyle Shanahan. Shanahan wants to run the ball. And I think, what's his name in Minnesota, a little bit more like McVay too, likes passing the ball. And there's nothing wrong with that. But some guys, Shanahan, LaFleur, I think they're a little more inclined to just pound you with the run game. They're a little more wired like an offensive coordinator from the 80s or the 90s. Well, the way to do that is with legit backs. And Kyle got one with Christian McCaffrey, and he's dominated the last year and a half. Aaron Jones is healthy. The Packers looked freaking good last year. You add Josh Jacobs with that, good luck trying to tackle those 2 guys. The other move, I didn't know that much about these guys, but the Rams, what the Rams did last year was awesome. I mean, they were probably the hottest team, or one of them, headed into the playoffs last year. And he obviously easily could have won that game against the Lions, who proved to be an awesome squad. But they signed, one big question mark a couple years ago was their offensive line. Wasn't very good. Well, a couple years later, as a buddy of mine in the league just texted me, The Rams are fucking huge in the middle. They got Jonah Jackson, who I'm told is a really steady, reliable, rock-solid player. Nothing sexy, just good. Like a lot of guards and centers. Most guards and centers aren't exactly the sexiest position. With him, Dotson, and Avila, their offensive line up the middle is excellent. We know how good Puka Nacua is, the way Matt Stafford played at the end of the season last year, the young running back they have from Notre Dame. We know defensively they're going to be solid. Now, there is a question mark. They lose Raheem Morris, who's was easily one of the better defensive coordinators in the league. But what do they have? They have an elite head coach who also impacts the game for 50% of the snaps because he's the offensive coordinator. So I look at the Rams and the Packers like they're improving. Their arrow is pointing up. Giants, Dolphins, arrow pointing down. Eagles, pretty interesting. I mean, they had to kind of plug some holes character-wise, leadership-wise, and talent-wise. And they definitely paid for it. And like I said with the Atlanta Falcons, I get it. You got an 80-plus-year-old owner that, the hearse doesn't follow you to the grave. So I don't think this team's going to win the Super Bowl anytime soon. But just, hell, winning the division, hosting a playoff game is a wild success based on what we've seen in recent years.